I was in academic training when I first went to school as instructor, 1947. I was an air training instructor, and I did that for 2 years. Very difficult job. And I made chief, and then they appointed me a rehearsal conductor for the band training department. So I worked for 4 years as a rehearsal conductor for the bands, and that's where I had most of my experience in conducting. And I was there for 7 years as an instructor, and the job came open at St. Pac Fleet in Hawaii. So I said, that should be a nice place to go. So I went there. I stayed there a year, and I got a call to come back to Annapolis. So I had to pack up and come back to Annapolis, and I made warrant officer there. There was no billet for warrant at Annapolis, so I had to move out, and I've had several bands on different stations. The academic training department, when I came there, the instrumental training was going very, very well. We had a lot of good instructors, and basically there's no big confusion. You take a student at a certain level and try to increase his playing ability, and try to get his mental attitude up a little bit so that he wants to play better. So to give him something to work at. The classroom training was always very difficult. There's always a problem trying to find suitable instructors that were knowledgeable enough to teach a class in the classroom day after day after day, teaching a subject like the first page of harmony, where the students had no previous experience in that and didn't care to, and didn't think that they needed it anyway, and so that was a difficult chore to keep the classrooms going. But we did manage to do that. We had one big success with the Army training. They stayed there a little less time than Navy, so we had to adjust things for them a little bit with the curriculum for them. We even tried going into to making up lesson plans for the harmony book, which was a real serious challenge, and we started it, and I never did find out whether they completed that task or not. But the 3 years I was there as academic training was the hardest 3 years of my career. I always enjoyed otherwise being the leader of the band, my own band, and that's where I was. I did a much better job there, I think. But being there and running the school with 400 to 500 students, with Gene and Dutch there helping out, for the 3 years that I was there, I think it ran very, very well. And the basic concept of what we were trying to do and trying to do with the future Navy music, I think is still being felt. Thanks to Gene and Dutch and all the other instructors that we had.
So now you three fellows were there together from 60 to 64, because that's when you came in 60, mm-hmm. and the other two were already there. I believe you relieved Stauffer, isn't that right?
Stauffer, yes.
And Gene relieved Marinac, isn't that right?
I relieved Marinac.
Yeah.
And then just before I left and the school moved, I became some kind of a personnel officer, which I never did really figure out what the hell I was doing. But it was. I guess it was a good job. I had to initial all the stuff that come across my desk, but there's no way you could read it all. You know, you could look at it, and I got in trouble with Dutch, because I told him one time, I said, I don't need all this money to buy this and that in this department. He hit the ceiling. That's how he lost his hair. And he said, if you do this, if we cut it down, we'll never get it back. And they convinced me, he and Frank. So I I left it the way it was, the way it had been presented to me, and endorsed it. And when the school left and went to Norfolk, I was transferred for my retirement duty back to Treasure Island, which is where my family was from, and I retired there after, I guess, 4 more years or something like that.
Okay. Now, what I would like for you to do, since you were there together from 60 to 64 when the school moved, was kind of walk this thing down to that time that the school actually moved. Because I left her in 62, and I don't really know what happened in those 2 years, and I think a lot of people would like to know.
Well, I'm not sure I'm the man to talk to about that. Maybe Frank or Dutch, but in the job I had, it had very, very little to do with the transfer. I'm sorry that I was not still band training because there were some things happened during the move that should never have happened. We had a school special dance band arrangement that had been written for the fleet, and we had copies of them, and we had the scores. We had the original scores, and somehow between there and Little Creek, these scores mysteriously disappeared. I would love to have had mine back, to see what I really had done in some of those arrangements, but it was not to be. I never understood that. That I didn't approve of. I didn't approve of guys being able to go through the trash pile at the old school and coming up with some very serious documents. I didn't approve of that either. But it was not my decision, and at that point it could not be corrected. Dutch knows a lot about the transfer, the physical part of the transfer. Mm-hmm. I think I had left by that time, hadn't I? Yeah. He knows about that. He followed this. What was it? LSD.
LST, wasn't it?
LST.
Yeah.
Down the channel with this motorboat with Sam Donahue on it, telling the School of Music farewell. Who gets this? Frank.
Anybody wants to talk?
The academic training department in the move down there was no problem there because all the curriculums and all the lesson material that they did just stayed the same, and I don't know whether it's still it's the same way now or not, but there was no problem. I left I knew the school was moving to Little Creek, and I had no desire to go there. The job come up at Pensacola, Florida, so I asked for that job, and so I left about 3 or 4 months before the school moved. I stayed my last 6 years there, and I retired from there.
So now Mr. Materiel had something to do with the physical business.
Materiel, there's a couple other things I'd like to cover before we get to that, really.
Okay.
And that is when I was talking about the specifications of musical instruments a while ago, every musical instrument company in the United States send me musical instruments to be evaluated. And Eamon's instructors filled out forms, what they like about this horn, what they don't like about the horn, and then into the repair shop about the strength of braces and the consistency of the brass that they were using and the weight of the plating they were using on the instruments. And we changed the industry of manufacturing musical instruments a very, very great deal because they took our word for it. Even Besson, Boozy Hawks in England send us horns to be evaluated. When they developed the Farkas French horn, Holton Company, And Farkas, of course, was with the Chicago Symphony Orchestra, and it was being built for him. The only problem with that horn was the bracings, and that was that they used the bracings from their old Holton French horn on the new Farkas horn. And the places the solder was almost 1/8 of an inch thick to make that brace fit on the tubing of the Farkas model. And little things like that. And I used to go out to the factories and evaluate what they were doing, how they were doing it. And I'd go out and inspect every shipment before we got it. And it was a lot to it, and I depended mostly on the instructors to evaluate the playing of the horns. And they did a tremendous job on that. And that was something that wasn't in their PD, so to speak. But they willingly did it to help make musical instruments better for the armed forces. As a materiel officer, I wasn't only in charge of the things I said, like musical instruments and so forth, and accessories, and the libraries, the procurement of them, and the keeping of them, but also the barracks and the music school building, and all that other stuff was part of it, and also the military part of it, where it was connected with the music school. So that was it. Then we heard that the music school was going to be moving. And I was in on the conferences over in the Beaupers. And they were telling us about the physical facility that we were going into, the barracks type thing. And of course I went through that at Bainbridge because I remodeled the barracks at Bainbridge to make a decent rehearsal halls and so forth. And then when it come to this, we were talking about it, and the officer in charge of the music school at that time was not a graduate of the School of Music. He came through the Old Fleet School in San Diego, but he was the officer in charge of the School of Music. So he figured that was just as good as those who went through the school, I think. But anyhow, in the Bureau, they were trying to cut costs and everything else. The first thing they wanted to cut was harmony and theory, all the academic part of music. The second thing they wanted to cut was bands and dance bands. All they wanted to do was to train individual musicians and send them out to fill in bands. That was going to be the main purpose of the School of Music. And I objected to this terribly, and I got in trouble with the captain who was running the thing over in the Bureau of Personnel and with the officer in charge of music school. In fact, it's the only not outstanding fitness report I ever got in my life, was over this new School of Music. And that was because I would not stop talking about how they're destroying the good bands that the Navy had built.